Think about the last time you walked into the office, right? Carrying the weight of just a truly horrible morning.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. Maybe you didn't sleep, or maybe you got some bad news, or, you just felt this overwhelming sense of dread. And as you're walking to your desk, a coworker passes by and casually asks, "How are you?"
And we know exactly what happens next.
Without missing a single beat, without even consulting your actual brain, you just smile and say, "I'm fine."
Yeah.
You lied. I mean, we all do. It happens millions of times a day. But what does it actually physically cost us to constantly compress our messy reality into a neat little 3-word lie?
It costs far more than we realize, honestly.
Yeah. So, okay, let's unpack this. The mission of our deep dive today is to really understand the mechanics of that exhaustion. We're looking at a deeply affecting essay by Dr. Jamie Horrocks, and it's titled WH Questions and the Cost of Compression.
Right. And Horrocks argues that this totally common question, how are you? It often masquerades as care, but for a lot of people, it actually functions as this rigid, exhausting social ritual.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. And to dive into this, we're going to explore some specific linguistic and psychological concepts that Horrocks brings to the table. Things like Phatic language, the mechanics of masking, and the neurological reality of alexithymia.
Right, which sound like big, heavy terms, but...
But they're not just academic jargon, I promise. They form the literal blueprint for understanding what Horrocks calls the cost of compression, which is, the actual toll it takes on a human body to squish a complex internal state into a tiny, acceptable social answer.
So to understand the weight of that compression, I guess we have to start with the environment that forces it in the first place, right?
Exactly. In the subtitle of the piece, Horrocks writes that unsupported adults learn to, quote, sound fine long before the room can hold the weather.
Hold the weather. I love that phrasing.
It's beautiful. And basically, they survive by choosing what's called the safest available script.
Yeah, and let's break down that idea of the safe script, because linguists actually have a name for this mechanism. They call it phatic language.
Right. Phatic language.
It's communication that isn't really used to exchange tangible facts or real information. It's just there to perform a social task. Like, it is the verbal equivalent of a nod.
Yeah, exactly. When the barista or your coworker asks how you are, they are not initiating a request for data about your psychological state.
No, they definitely don't want a data dump.
Right. What's fascinating here is that they're just initiating a pleasantry. The script dictates the response. Phatic language is essentially the grease in the gears of daily social interaction.
Which we need, to some extent.
We do.
Yeah.
But Horrocks highlights a much darker utility for this language, because for unsupported adults, meaning individuals who grew up in environments where their true emotional states were ignored or invalidated or, even actively penalized, this phatic language evolves from a polite handshake into a strict survival mechanism. They learn to rely on the safest available script because experience has taught them that the room cannot, as Horrocks puts it, hold the weather.
I really want to focus on that phrase for a second, the room not being able to hold the weather.
It's so evocative.
It is. Because if your internal state is this chaotic storm like grief or anxiety or confusion, the people around you simply don't have the capacity or the desire to sit in the rain with you.
No, they want sunshine.
Right. So you provide a fake forecast. It makes me think of how are you as a kind of social toll booth.
Oh, a toll booth. Interesting.
Yeah, like it's a necessary fee you pay to enter a space. You toss your little I'm fine coin into the basket, the gate goes up, and you are allowed to proceed with the meeting or the dinner party.
That's a great way to visualize the initial transaction. But let's take that a step further. Unlike a real toll booth on a highway, where you just pay the fee and drive away freely,
Right.
the social toll booth travels with you. The trap here isn't the initial greeting. It's the fact that for someone who relies on masking, the script never ends.
Oh, wow.
Because, society does need a baseline of polite friction reduction to operate smoothly, right?
Yeah.
We can't all unpack our deepest traumas in the grocery checkout line.
No, that would be a nightmare.
Right. But the psychological damage occurs when that script replaces genuine connection entirely, or when an individual feels they are never allowed to step out of that toll booth.
Wait, so the damage is in the permanence of the performance. Like if sounding fine becomes your default and your only mode of operation because authenticity has always been dangerous,
Yes.
then the safe script becomes a cage.
Precisely. You are constantly translating your complex internal state into something palatable for others. Masking, in this context, is the active process of putting on that acceptable social face.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. It requires an individual to constantly run this complex translation software in the background of their mind. They're monitoring their tone, their facial expressions, filtering their genuine thoughts.
And anticipating the comfort levels of everyone around them.
Exactly.
And running heavy software in the background drains the battery.
Fast.
Which kind of moves us into the long-term consequences of playing this part too well. Because if you run that translation software for decades, you eventually crash.
You have to.
Yeah, and Horrocks refers to this inevitability as the quiet ache of late recognition.
And late recognition often hits people well into adulthood. They've spent years, maybe decades, perfecting the art of sounding fine. They are absolute experts at the script.
Yeah, to the outside observer, they appear highly capable.
Extremely capable.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. There's a quote from the text that perfectly captures the tragedy of appearing capable. Horrocks writes about the, quote, strange aftermath when people are startled by your collapse because they mistook your fluency for ease.
We really need to dissect the contrast between those two words, fluency and ease.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because being fluent means you are highly articulate and highly functional within the system. You know exactly what to say to deflect concern.
You're glib, almost.
Right. And society looks at that polished surface, that high-functioning behavior, and misinterprets it as emotional well-being or ease. But ease is the absence of effort. Fluency requires massive, unrelenting cognitive load.
That is such a tragic irony. Society actually rewards this fluency, which isolates the person even further.
It completely reinforces the cage.
Right. We promote the fluent person, we praise them for being so put together, and by doing so, we reinforce the walls. Because you are so flawlessly fluent, nobody ever thinks to check on you.
Why would they? You seem fine.
Exactly. You've built an impenetrable armor that keeps everyone around you perfectly comfortable while you are literally suffocating inside it. I want to ask you, the listener, right now consider your own interactions. How much of your daily exhaustion comes from maintaining this flawless fluency just to keep other people comfortable?
That's the real question.
Right. How much of your vital energy is spent actively managing someone else's perception of your well-being?
And that exhaustion is the core of the late recognition Horrocks describes. It is this devastating moment where an individual finally realizes the immense accumulated toll of this lifelong performance.
And they collapse.
They collapse. And not necessarily because of some sudden new catastrophic trauma,
Right.
but from the sheer crushing weight of holding up the mask for so long.
Right.
And the people around them are completely startled.
Like it came out of nowhere.
Right. The collapse seems sudden to them
Yeah.
because they only ever saw the glide of the duck on the water. They never saw the furious paddling happening beneath the surface to maintain that illusion of ease.
But the text makes it very clear that this exhaustion isn't just a metaphor, right? It doesn't just live in the abstract realm of psychology. It lives in the physical body. It's incredibly physical.
Which brings us to the actual title of the piece, The Cost of Compression. The physiological toll of squishing yourself down.
And Horrocks does something truly remarkable right at the beginning of the essay to illustrate this physical toll. Before diving into the theory, they offer this gentle note to the reader.
I love that part.
They are directly addressing the reader's nervous system.
Yeah, they warn the reader that if they feel themselves tightening, floating away, or beginning to brace for the page, they should just pause. Put the piece down, go circle the block, get a drink.
It is a profound rule of engagement. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Horrocks is explicitly giving the reader's nervous system permission to stand down.
Wow.
The text notes that the nervous system does not have to be emotionally articulate on demand here.
Which is huge.
It is. To understand why reading a simple essay would cause the body to brace, we have to look at the concept of alexithymia.
Alexithymia is typically defined as a difficulty in identifying and describing one's own emotions. But we need to look at how a person develops this.
It's not just something you're born with.
Not always. When you spend decades ignoring your body's distress signals just to smile and say, I'm fine, your brain eventually stops sending those signals to your conscious mind.
Oh, wow.
The neurological bridge between your physical sensation and your conscious awareness is just burned.
So masking actively causes the alexithymia. You train your brain to ignore the body because the body's truth is socially inconvenient.
Yes. The individual becomes completely disconnected from their interoceptive signals, their internal physical cues.
Right.
So for someone with alexithymia or someone deeply burnt out by masking, the sudden demand to articulate how they feel, To answer a WH question like, how are you or why are you sad?
Yeah.
It's not a simple request. It can trigger a massive physiological stress response.
Yeah.
Their nervous system literally braces for impact because it perceives the question as a threat.
Like a pop quiz.
Exactly. It's a test they might fail.
And Herrick's contrasts this high-stakes test with the safety of a simple weather report.
Yes.
They write about the difference between acknowledging the general climate of your mind versus the intense pressure of what they call a test of whether you can name the sky quickly enough.
That phrasing is incredible.
It is. I want to map this metaphor out because it is just brilliant. The weather is your internal state. It's a chaotic storm, it's fog, it's a hurricane. It just is.
It's happening.
Exactly. But demanding someone name the sky is demanding taxonomy. It's demanding that they instantly categorize, label, and explain that storm to someone who just wanted a polite greeting.
It's like zipping up an overstuffed suitcase.
Oh, yeah. Eventually, the zipper breaks.
Right. It forces the individual to rapidly translate a sprawling, chaotic physical reality into a tidy, socially acceptable sentence.
Which is impossible.
It really is.
Okay.
And if every single time you are asked a WH question, who, what, where, when, why, and how, you feel this overwhelming internal demand to perform this impossible translation,
Yeah.
your nervous system learns that social interaction is inherently unsafe. The body tightens. It prepares for the exhaustion of the performance.
We talked earlier about running heavy translation software in the background of your brain. Compressing your emotions isn't just hiding them. It is an active, continuous processing task.
Exactly.
And eventually the battery drains, the system crashes, and the body's ultimate defense mechanism is to pull the plug entirely.
And that system crash is what Horrocks describes as floating away, or dissociation.
Right.
When the cost of compression becomes too high, the mind simply detaches from the present moment to survive the sheer physiological overwhelm of the demand.
So if the body is constantly bracing, constantly draining its battery to translate these emotions, what happens when a person finally realizes they just cannot carry the weight anymore?
They usually seek help.
Right. What happens when they seek professional help? You would think a therapist's office is the one place where you can safely uninstall that translation software.
You would hope so.
But Horrocks transitions to a personal anecdote that proves otherwise, introducing their experience with the clinical gaze.
Right. And they approach it sideways, describing it as a small absurdity. The clinical gaze is a term that refers to how medical and psychological professionals observe, categorize, and diagnose patients.
Oh, okay.
It is the lens through which the medical establishment views a person, often reducing their complex humanity to a set of symptoms to be fixed.
Which is already problematic.
Right. But the tragedy in Horrocks' account lies in the fact that they entered this clinical gaze as an adult.
Why does being an adult change the nature of that gaze?
Because the clinical world inherently assumes that a physically grown adult already possesses the foundational tools to articulate their inner life.
Ah, they assume you have the vocabulary.
Yes, they assume a baseline of emotional literacy. What Horrocks points out is that in the adult clinical world, no one hands out neat developmental scripts or tidy answers.
So what does this all mean? This reveals a massive systemic blind spot, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because if you're a child struggling to express your feelings, the system has tools for you. There are picture charts with smiley and frowny faces, emotion wheels, behavioral specialists. Kids are literally handed developmental scripts to help them learn how to bridge the gap between their feelings and their words.
Right.
But if you are a 40-year-old who has spent their entire life expertly masking so well that you fooled the world and yourself and you finally hit the wall of late recognition, the clinic assumes you already know how to speak the language of emotion.
The adult clinical gaze completely fails to recognize that a grown, highly articulate adult might be entirely unequipped to answer a simple question like, how do you feel? Without spiraling into a trauma response.
Because of the alexithymia.
Exactly. The clinical environment demands fluency. It requires you to sit in a chair, look a professional in the eye, and articulate your trauma clearly.
But wait, the clinic is demanding the very thing that broke the patient in the first place.
Exactly the paradox. The therapy session itself becomes a WH question. The therapist asks, why do you feel this way? Or how does that impact you? They are asking the patient to perform the exact same emotional compression, the same desperate translation of the weather that caused their nervous system to collapse.
That's horrifying.
The system expects the patient to use the poison as the cure.
The clinic demands you name the sky when you don't even have the vocabulary for the clouds.
Beautifully put.
I mean, if the clinical world itself lacks the tools for adults who have spent their lives hiding, it really begs the question of where these individuals are supposed to learn how to finally drop the mask.
It's a huge problem.
We have walked through a pretty dense and difficult landscape today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the hollow ritual of phatic language, the social toll booth where "how are you" is just a fee we pay to exist in public, and then we explored the painful reality of late recognition, where society fatally mistakes a person's exhausted fluency for actual ease.
And we also detailed the physiological reality of this performance. We examined how the nervous system burns the bridge to its own interoceptive signals, which results in alexithymia.
Right.
We looked at how the body literally tightens and braces under the constant demand to compress the truth, and how the adult clinical gaze so often fails to recognize this invisible labor.
It honestly changes the way you look at every casual interaction. I really want you, listening to this, to reflect on your own environment today. Notice when you are using your own fluency as a shield to avoid being truly seen. But equally important, be mindful of whether you are unwittingly asking the people in your life to compress their messy, sprawling realities into a tidy little box just to keep yourself comfortable. Are you demanding that they quickly name the sky when they just need a moment to exist in the weather?
That leads to a final thought worth sitting with, I think, building directly on Horrocks' premise. If the simple question, "how are you?" is so often received as a high-stakes test, a demand for compression that triggers the nervous system to brace for impact, then we have to fundamentally rethink our definition of support.
Okay, how so?
What if true care isn't found in asking questions at all?
Oh,
What if simply sitting in silence with someone, allowing the room to actually hold the weather without demanding a verbal report, communicates far more safety and acceptance than any script ever could?
wow. It flips our entire approach to connection upside down. Maybe the deepest form of human support isn't interrogating the storm to find out exactly how much it's raining. Maybe the deepest form of support is simply handing someone an umbrella and standing quietly beside them in the downpour.